Hello dear listeners, our second lecture is called Design and Development of Teaching Materials. As you know, designing learning materials is a systematic process of designing educational experiences in a consistent and reliable manner. It is the art and science of creating effective learning experiences that lead to the desired acquisition of knowledge or skills. Today we are working in the following order. We will consider the basics of designing and developing educational resources, such as concept, goal, principles, characteristics, and requirements. We will determine the stages of the development of educational materials, the components of electronic educational materials, as well as the criteria for the effectiveness of the development of educational materials. Let's dwell on the general basics of designing and developing educational resources. Learning resources are everything that can be used by students in the learning process, directly or indirectly. Learning resources play an important role in achieving students' learning goals. In addition to books, learning resources include all the elements that can be used by students to expand their competence and facilitate the learning process. All external elements that play a role in stimulating the learning process can be considered as learning resources. Learning resources facilitate effective learning and help learners learn. Let's look at a few definitions given by scientists. According to Andy Prestovo, learning resources basically include all forms of elements such as objects, data, facts, ideas, people, and others that can start the learning process, such as batch books, modules, student worksheets, real-world objects, models, layouts, questions about banks, museums, zoos, and so on. Win Sanjay suggests that learning resources are anything that is present in a learning environment and functionally supports the optimization of learning outcomes. Optimization here refers not only to learning outcomes, but also to students' interactions with various sources that stimulate the learning process and accelerate the understanding and assimilation of the material being studied. According to Sitepu, learning resources play an important role in the formation of knowledge, skills, attitudes, beliefs, emotional aspects, and feelings. Without learning resources, learning cannot be effective. Anika Yadi argues that learning resources include all types of sources, including data, individuals, or specific objects that can be used by learners to learn, either individually or in combination, to achieve specific learning goals or competencies. The development of educational materials pursues the goal of improving the quality of the process and results of learning of students both at the individual level and at the collective level. Educational materials solve the following tasks: responding to the learning needs of students in accordance with their learning models, formation of student skills in the use of various educational resources, overcoming learning difficulties that students face individually, providing students with the opportunity to develop various models of learning, encouraging the adoption of new, creative, and innovative approaches to learning, creating an engaging learning environment. The development of high-quality educational materials requires serious preparation, understanding of the needs of students and the goals of education. The general principles of designing and developing educational resources are relevance and reliability. Training materials should be based on up-to-date data and information that are relevant to the latest trends. Simplicity and comprehensibility. Materials should be presented in a way that is accessible to students, avoiding unnecessary complexity and using clear and understandable examples. Interactivity and practicality. The inclusion of assignments, practical exercises, and projects allows students to apply what they have learned in practice, which increases their effectiveness and understanding of the material. Feedback and assessment, providing students with mechanisms for feedback and assessment of their knowledge, which will help them assess their progress and understanding of the material. Focus on practical application, focusing on practical tasks and scenarios that students may encounter in real-world work settings. The main characteristics of the design and development of educational resources are: 1. Synergy allows students to learn independently using the developed educational materials. 2. Self-sufficiency assumes that the content of the studied unit of competence or subcompetence is contained in one educational material in its entirety. 3. Autonomy implies that educational materials should be developed independently of other educational materials or should not necessarily be used in conjunction with others. 4. Educational materials must have a high adaptive ability to the achievements of science and technology, that is, adaptability. 5. Functionality. Each instruction and presentation of information is useful and user-friendly, including the ease of the user's response and access to it at will. There are some requirements for the design and development of educational resources, such as standard. the requirement of scientificity, ensuring the problem-solving nature of learning, ensuring visibility, consistency, and systematicity. Specific requirements are related to adaptability, interactivity, assistance in the development of intellectual potential and communicative abilities. Psychological correspondence to the sensory perceptual levels of the cognitive process. The presentation of educational material should be focused on the age of the contingent and the specifics of training. Technological requirements imply the functioning of educational electronic materials under the control of different operating systems, in local and network modes, the maximum use of multimedia and telecommunication technologies, reliability and long-term performance, resistance to defects, the presence of protection against unauthorized actions of users, effective and expedient use of resources, simplicity and reliability installation and uninstallation. Health-saving requirements are aimed at protecting the health of students and teachers, the use of technologies that do not harm the health of participants in the process. Ergonomic requirements include the organization of a user-friendly interface, requirements for the color characteristics of the software, for the spatial placement of information on the screen, for the organization of a dialogue, for the font design of symbols and signs, and requirements for sound accompaniment. Let's dwell on the stages of developing educational materials using the example of electronic learning resources. The very first stage is the selection of sources. At this stage, sources and literature are selected that most fully correspond to the curriculum for the discipline, concise and containing more examples and tasks, available in convenient formats that allow them to be assembled into single components with the addition and expansion of information. After selecting sources, we move on to the next stage, the selection of content. At this stage, we analyze the selected sources and compare them with the curriculum. Next, we develop a table of contents and a list of concepts. The table of contents is formed in accordance with the content of the curriculum for the discipline. Sections are divided into modules. At the stage of forming modules, the educational material of selected sources is processed into the texts of modules. Texts that are not included in the modules are excluded. New texts are being developed that are not in the sources. Each module is provided with similar illustrations, which should be selected in such a way as to explain the material that is difficult for students to perceive in more detail and simply. At the next stage, the implementation of hypertext in electronic form takes place. As a result, the theoretical part of the electronic edition is created in the first approximation to it, which can already be used for educational purposes. Next, we develop the control part. Test tasks of various types are determined for each module. Indicators of parameters and criteria for assessing their implementation, tests, and help material are formed. The next stage is the stage of selecting material for multimedia embodiment. Here, ways of explaining the most complex material are created. Texts are selected to be replaced by multimedia materials. At the stage of developing the sound accompaniment, texts of sound accompaniment are created for each module in order to unload the training frame from textual information and use the auditory memory of students to facilitate understanding and memorization of the studied material. And next, there is the preparation of material for visualization. At this stage, scenarios for visualization of modules are developed to achieve the greatest clarity, maximum unloading of the screen from the text, and the use of the student's emotional memory to facilitate understanding and memorization of the studied material. At the final stage, electronic visualization of modules is carried out. That is, the developed scenarios receive computer embodiment using animation of drawings, graphs, text, and other educational material of the module. In general, this is how the development of an electronic learning resource, one of the most complex educational resources, takes place. The components of educational materials are text messages, materials, means, people, tools, environment, management. Let's take a closer look at each component. Text messages. The content of the message includes all the topics needed by students in the educational environment and includes all the skills needed by the local community. The content of the messages varies to cover each subject or skill, from simple to complex, is relevant, accurate, and relevant to the context. The presentation of messages is made in order to increase motivation for further learning. Materials are presented in various formats, such as printed, non-printed, audiovisual, computer. They are practical and easy to use, inspiring you to continue the learning process. The number of materials meets the needs of individual and group learning, as well as the different learning styles of learners, supporting learners in presenting learning material in a variety of formats. They aim to encourage students to introduce new innovations in the presentation of the discipline. The means take into account the existing needs in each subject or field of knowledge and correspond to the progress and changes in science technology. They are easy to use and practical to use, ensuring a safe and fun learning process. They provide the opportunity for students to use individually or in groups, providing a wider learning space for students, and also provide an opportunity for joint generation by students and teachers. Funds must be effective and efficient in supporting learning and teaching activities. The next component is people. They have in-depth knowledge in their field, extensive experience. This component should ensure the provision of information that meets the needs of students, effective and persuasive communication, encouraging motivation to continue learning, flexibility in attendance, and demonstration of exemplary character. The next component is that the tools should be focused on achieving learning goals. They adapt to the characteristics of the discipline, correspond to the needs and characteristics of students, contributing to the understanding of the essence of the discipline by students. They should also ensure diversity and monitoring of the development of learning theory, promoting student engagement and independence, creating an interactive, creative, innovative, effective and engaging learning environment, awakening students' sense of challenge and motivating them to explore and adapt to the context of the existing learning environment. The next component is that the environment should correspond to the goals of learning, with the characteristics of the discipline, with the characteristics of students, and be easily achievable for students. It is safe and focused on the formation of real experience. It should also be interesting and motivate to learn more. The environment provides efficiency as a learning resource. And the last component, management, includes a systematic and comprehensive planning process. Curriculum, syllabuses, and learning implementation plans already include approaches to learning using different types of sources. Under management, the learning resource is developed in collaboration with learners, learning resource managers, and provides integration with other existing learning resources adapted to all subjects. The criteria for the effectiveness of educational resources in the element analysis and interpretation of requirements for educational materials are: 1. A brief description, focus and type of educational resource are specified with the content of the EP. 2. The likely target audience, its training needs, and the learning environment for the resource are studied. 3. The characteristics of students and users of the educational material are determined. 4. Existing information that may be relevant is collected, compared and analyzed. 5. Ethical and legal considerations are determined and taken into account. 6. The development work plan is written and documented. The next element of the assessment of the educational material is planning the content of the material. Its criteria for effectiveness are: 1. A variety of design options are created using different principles and techniques. 2. Time is given to think about projects to identify the consequences of each of them. 3. The diversity of learners and users and their learning styles is researched and included in project specifications. 4. A plan or prototype of educational material is developed. 5. The characteristics of the content of the educational product are analyzed and a plan of the proposed content is drawn up. 6. The breadth and depth of the content offered are determined according to the design prototype, content specifications, and financial constraints. 7. If necessary, appropriate personnel are identified to support the development phase. The next element that ensures the quality of the educational material is the development of the content of the educational material. Its criteria for effectiveness are: 1. The content and content specification are developed according to the agreed design. 2. If necessary, changes are made to the design and/or content to account for changes in the project parameters. 3. Mechanisms for checking the progress of work have been created. 4. The text is clear, concise, grammatically correct, and relevant to the target audience. 5. Visuals are relevant, instructive, and appropriate for the target audience. 6. The asset is formatted using the appropriate style guide. The criteria for the effectiveness of the element checking the educational material before its implementation are: Task 1. The content of the resource is checked for accuracy and relevance of the information in accordance with the content specifications. 2. Text, format, and visuals are checked for clarity and purposefulness. 3. An external review is conducted using appropriate methods and feedback is provided where necessary. 4. The final version is checked against the task and other relevant criteria to ensure that it meets all requirements. And the last element, evaluation of the design and development process. Its criteria are: 1. The design and development process is checked for compliance with the relevant evaluation criteria. 2. Time is given to reflect and identify areas for improvement. 3. The identified improvements are documented for future projects. Dear listeners, so we conclude our today's lecture. To fully master the materials, you need to answer the following questions. 1. What are the main principles of developing teaching materials in higher education that you consider to be key to successful learning? 2. What aspects of updating information in educational materials are important for students' learning? 3. How does the principle of application focus affect the quality of teaching materials in university disciplines? 4. What are the most effective methods in the development of educational materials? 5. How important is it to consider the different learning styles of students when developing learning materials? To answer, please use the recommended literature indicated in the presentation. Thank you for your attention. See you next time.